It's an obscure minor prophet that you didn't even know was a book in the Bible, yet alone how to pronounce his name. The book of Habakkuk is an intimate moment between Habakkuk and God. In it, we learn that Habakkuk is very upset by the injustice in Judah. Now, God's people had hardened their hearts and turned away from God. They'd actually just gotten their act together thanks to Josiah, and now that he has passed away, their kingdom is in ruins yet again because they've decided that they no longer want to follow God. Now, Habakkuk actually noticed the unrighteousness and demanded to God God's wrath. He demanded justice. And God's response to him is actually one of my favorite responses God has ever given in the Bible, and it comes from verse 5 in chapter 1. The Lord answers, "Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told." God's response is, you wouldn't believe me even if I told you, which I am right now. So God's saying, you're not going to believe me, and you're not going to like my answer in whatever it is. Now, isn't that just like him? Isn't that just like God to say something like that? But the fact is that God knows us all too well. See, this verse tells us a lot of things. Number one, God knows our weaknesses. What's that moment when we start to distrust him, when we're no longer going to agree with him? And God knows what walls we put up. See, for Habakkuk, right, it wasn't until the injustice, the cruelness that was happening amongst the people actually hit home for him that he actually started to even care. And that God's going to do this thing anyways. However, whatever God's decision is to punish his people, God's going to do it no matter what we say about it. See, because the thing is, it's not about you. In fact, his ways are much higher than ours. In Isaiah 55:9, it says, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." But the final thing that this verse actually shows is that no matter what, God's going to see it through. You may have noticed when he said, "For I am going to do something in your days." He's telling it's going to happen now. He's not like sometime, maybe I will. He's going to say it's happening right now. God will see through his plans. What was God about to do? Well, God was actually about to unleash the Babylonians on his own people. The Babylonians are their enemy, their sworn enemy. And whatever they dish out is much worse than whatever injustice Habakkuk's actually complaining about. Anything but that, Habakkuk cries. But the Babylonians in power causes actually a chain reaction, something that we can see when we look at the Bible. And this chain reaction causes for grace. It's a chain reaction for Christ. It's a chain reaction for redemption to come for everybody in the future. See, God asks him, and he also asks us today to wait and remain faithful in troubled times. To rely on him as he has created us to be. To rely. God is determined to return us to our original state. Have you ever noticed that? He spends a great deal of time trying to return us to our original state. His righteousness doesn't always look like our version of righteousness. The walls, the facades, the protection we put up has actually blinded us from our own sin, that when God's discipline, his act of love, when his righteousness comes, we tell ourselves, oh, that's okay, I don't need it. I've got my own version of righteousness. God desires for us to live as we were made to be, how we were created. So quit justifying our current state with cliched quotes like, well, we're only human, or it's only natural, and we have forgotten who we really are. For Habakkuk, it took trusting in God's timing to actually find his true self. As he gave himself, he relied more on God. And he realized actually it was God's trust, not his trust, that he was being clothed with. That God's trust actually is much greater and bigger than our own. And he was now being clothed in what God could strengthen him with. It's more powerful than what he could do on his own. And he found God's power sustaining him. He comes to realize the more that he was patient, the more he waited, the more that he was faithful, his voice started to turn, and he finally said this. Verse 19, "The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights." He compares himself to a deer, God's creature, right? And in its true form, can actually scale the heights with precise, graceful footing. And yet that's how we were supposed to be and how we were created, to make graceful footsteps. Let me tell you a story. When I was in film, my boss, we're sitting in my office at some point. We're both working on stuff, and just out of the blue, he just says, "Hey, I was thinking about our Christmas party." And it's like, "Yeah?" He's like, "Hey, we should go to a strip club." But immediately, the first thing that I said just came right out of my mouth, and I said, "Ricky, don't do that." And then I just went right back to work. My boss, he knows I'm a Christian. Why would he ask me such a foolish and ridiculous thing? And is it possible that my boss in that moment was simply testing me? Is it possible that he wanted to see what my reaction was going to be like? And my reaction was quicker than I could think. Because when I grew up, I had a friend, a mentor as a kid, who told us about whenever somebody tells you to do something that you were not made to do, simply respond with, "Ricky, don't do that." And just like that, it clicked right in, and I said, "Ricky, don't do that." It's just something funny about this world, right? And it's actually in these moments when our graceful footsteps come out. When it's actually so easy to put up a wall, when it's so easy to maybe indulge in society a little bit, go along with it, or maybe just have plain apathy, whatever. Instead, show your true form. Show who God has really made you to be, and reveal who God has created his people to be, including the other person. It requires vulnerability, but it also requires the knowledge that God will wrap us in his righteousness, and that it is actually his strength that will help us walk this rocky terrain of life gracefully like his deer. But here's the deal. We need to stop pretending to be something that we're not, because doesn't it look really weird for a deer to have a mask on its face?